Richard Neve was a British medical artist, and he was retired from the University of Manchester in England. And he set out upon a project to try to recreate what Jesus looked like. What was his appearance? Is there any way, short of the pictures that we see by the medieval artists, to create something more accurate? And he was working with the Israeli archaeologists and British scientists, and they employed some fairly sophisticated computers, and they came up using a technique that they use to solve crimes. They came up with an image, this image that you're seeing now. This image is quite different than what we're accustomed to seeing, but it helps me to understand what the prophet Isaiah was saying when he wrote, "He grew up before him like a tender shoot and like a root out of dry ground. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him." Nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. Whatever it was that Jesus employed to draw people to him, it was apparently not his appearance, but it was his nature. What was he like? The Jewish culture prevented people from making images of anything, of people, of animals, even the heavenly bodies. It was considered to be a form of idolatry, and this was not uncommon. It was actually, during certain times, practiced by other religions, where they would not allow an image of a person to be made. And this presents a real problem when you're trying to understand during the Transfiguration, when Moses and Elijah appeared to Jesus and the disciples that were with him. And how did they recognize him? They don't have a picture. They don't know what. Perhaps Jesus said, "Let me introduce you to," and that's how it was done. But there would have been no pictures of Moses, of Solomon, of King David, Elijah, anybody from the Old Testament, because that was against Jewish law, that they had tried so diligently to honor God and not worship idols, that they just put these restrictions on themselves. Primarily, this was a monotheistic restriction. It was for a while, I understand, enforced in Islam as well. But nonetheless, we know that there were no images of Jesus that were made. And the westernized artists felt the need to fill in the gap, as is done so often. And this, the pictures that we have today, the nice, good-looking man with the long hair and the light skin and all, is absolutely not correct. So what else can we say? I accept this homely version of Jesus because of Isaiah 53 verse 2. It helps me to understand. But if I look at Jesus and I look at his nature, Hebrews says in chapter 1 verse 3 that he is the exact representation of God. He is the exact representation of God. It's in his nature. Colossians 2 verse 9 says, all the fullness of the deity lives in bodily form. So what we see in Jesus is the God of the Old Testament. Now, there was a time during the first century when the Gnostic theologians developed a theory that there were two gods involved in this whole thing. That one, there was a God of the Old Testament, and two, there is a God of the New Testament, and they're not the same God. Now, that's not necessary as long as we, and that's for a discussion at a different time, but yet I want to see what God of the God of the Old Testament looked like, acted like, behaved like, and I do it in light of Jesus Christ, the exact representation of God. The God of the old and the God of the new are the same God. Jesus is God with us. Jesus is Emmanuel. He said himself, before Abraham was, I am. Remember, that's exactly what the God of the Old Testament said to Moses. Who shall I say has sent me? Tell them, the I am has sent you. Jesus said before Abraham was, I am, our Jesus. He forgave sin on the earth. Now that really pushed the Pharisees and teachers of the law, because no man can forgive sin on this earth. That's reserved for God. Yes, it is. That's right. God is love, we read in the Bible. God is love. When we read the Old Testament, I encourage you to filter everything you read through Jesus. Put your filters on as you're reading and say, Jesus is my demonstration of my God in the Old Testament. This is God. I encourage you to hear the stories. Hear the stories. Hear the stories of Jesus. There's the key. Jesus touched the leper. What? Don't do that. Don't do that, the disciples were saying. Jesus touched the leper. Then he healed him. But he was not afraid to touch a person who was unclean. He sought out the Samaritan woman. I love that story. He sought her out. And he revealed to her who he was, the Messiah, the one, the promised one. He welcomed sinners to him. Jesus welcomed sinners to him. The one who says, before Abraham was, I am, welcomes sinners to him. He ate with sinners and tax collectors. That's our Jesus. That's what he was like. He praised the faith of so many people. The woman who had the issue of blood, he praised her faith. She went through the crowd and sneaked up and touched the garment, seeking to be healed by the Messiah. He praised her faith. He praised the faith of the centurion, the one who was not even a Jew. He praised the faith of the Canaanite woman. He praised the faith of so many people because he understood what it took to be that way. He loved the blind and he healed them. The hungry, he fed them. Why did he feed the 5,000? Why did he feed the 4,000? They were hungry. That's why he fed them. That's Jesus. That's the I am, the God who is the exact representation of the Old Testament God. God is not, the God of the Old Testament is not, nor is he today, the big I in the sky. The big I looking for you to make a mistake. That God is not the God of the Old Testament. That God is not the God of the New Testament. The most famous verse in the Bible, for God so loved the world. What's that mean? When you read that, I want you to think of the leper. Think of the Samaritan woman. Think of the sinners. Think of the centurion. Think of the Canaanite woman, the woman with the issue of blood. Think of them and then read, for God so loved the world. That's the God. That's the God of the Old Testament. That's the God of the New Testament. God bless you as you seek to understand the nature of the God of the Old versus the God of the New.